Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is February the 27th. It's close to 1 p.m. as I guess Economic Matters can do this. We are here today. We have a few bills. Quite a few have been withdrawn. So for those that have withdrawn, thank you. And we're going to call our first bill, which is House Bill 501. And while we do have a panel, we're going to call the Lieutenant Governor up to speak. Ma'am, if you'd like to come up first, and then we'll call your panel when you're done.
Thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. Just want to give a big shout out to my representatives from District 15, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo and Delegate Lily Chi. So it's great to be joining all of. Did I say something wrong? Okay. All right. I'm Aruna Miller, Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in strong support of House Bill 501, the Registered Apprenticeship Investment for a Stronger Economy, the RAISE Act. I also want to just, on top of my remarks, want to give a shout out to Senator Rosapep, who's been really the key person on Maryland's workforce and apprenticeship in the General Assembly. Really, he's worked really hard on so many aspects of this. So just want to say thank you to him. And a shout out to the 2030 Commission for the vision and hard work to reduce skills shortages in high demand occupations. So joining me later today in the panel, you'll hear from Secretary Wu and other talented panel who will speak on the details of the bill, but I wanted to focus on why the Moore-Miller administration has made House Bill 501 a priority. For Maryland to stay globally competitive, we must invest in both today's workforce and the talent pipeline that will drive our future. For Marylanders to secure good-paying middle-class jobs, we need to create clear pathways and real opportunities. That's exactly what House Bill 501 delivers. Now, I get to travel across the state of Maryland quite a bit in my capacity as Lieutenant Governor, and I got to tell you, there's nothing I love talking about more than the great state of Maryland to Marylanders. Look, we have the most diverse population in the Mid-Atlantic. We're home to the wealthiest majority Black counties in the country. Charles County, Mr. Chairman, and Prince George's County, to the members who are from Prince George's. Yeah, there you go. We are home to 60 federal agencies, 20 military installations, and Vice Chair Crosby, here's one of my favorite factoids that I like to give. Do you all know where the highest percentage of aerospace engineers in the nation are? California. Not the state of California, California, Maryland. Right, Vice Chair Crosby? You know exactly where that is. We also boast world-class infrastructure, the Port of Baltimore, BWI Airport, powering commerce and connectivity. And when it comes to innovation, we lead the way. 74 federal research labs, twice as many as any other state. And we're home to 57 colleges and universities and 4 remarkable HBCUs. We have the infrastructure, the innovation, the institutions to drive Maryland forward. And we have our greatest resource, which is the people of Maryland. But truly to lead, we must better align our workforce with the opportunities ahead, ensuring every Marylander has skills to thrive and every industry has a talent to grow. Currently, we have 33 workers for every 100 job openings. And studies show that Marylanders aged 17 to 34 make up nearly 2/3 of those leaving the state, creating a long-term challenges for workforce and businesses. By investing in apprenticeships, we provide hands-on experience, a direct path to high-paying jobs, and a strong industry connections. When we cultivate this ecosystem, we don't just strengthen our workforce, we create real incentives for people to build their careers, put down roots, and contribute to Maryland's economy for the long haul. And the Moore Miller administration has been taking bold steps to strengthen the Maryland's workforce. We expanded Earn Maryland with record funding to scale up workforce training, ensuring employers lead the way, launched the Apprenticeship Pledge to bring more private sector employers into the apprenticeship programs, and funded Cyber Maryland to create cyber workforce training programs at all 16 Maryland's community colleges. And HB 501 builds on the same momentum. It strengthens Maryland's apprenticeship programs by making them more accessible, opening more doors for workers in both traditional trades and high-growth fields like IT and cybersecurity. It creates the Maryland Office of Registered Apprenticeship Development to scale up those programs statewide with policy updates. It gives the state more flexibility to recognize experience so workers can get licensed and on the job faster. It also creates support programs to connect businesses and apprentices, making it easier for employers to train the next generation of skilled workers. What we know for sure is that apprenticeships work. They offer real-world experience, a paycheck from day one, and a direct route into stable careers without crushing student debt, a workforce that keeps talent here and drives Maryland forward. I ask for your favorable report on House Bill 501. Thank you for allowing me to share thoughts here today.
Well, thank you, ma'am, and seeing no questions, I hope you feel better. Thank you very much.
Thank
and I
you.
will invite your panel up. We have Bruce Spector, Christopher May, Joan Fior, and Secretary Portia Wu. Madam Secretary, would you like to go first?
Yes, if I could.
I don't want everybody on, you don't have to be on the timer, but, you know.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee. My name is Portia Wu. I'm Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor, 2 days in a row. Haven't achieved my dream of three-peating the committee yet, but someday. I want to thank Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller for their leadership in driving the growth of registered apprenticeship as a key strategy for growing our economy, supporting Maryland businesses, and enabling more Marylanders to build family-sustaining careers. This legislation and the governor's budget invest in apprenticeship, and we know that that is a critical tool, as the Lieutenant Governor highlighted earlier, to grow our economy. I also want to thank our labor partners who have worked closely alongside us as we've worked to grow apprenticeship in new industries while maintaining program integrity and building off the gold standard that has been established over many years of labor management cooperation. Their collaboration has been invaluable through this process. They've made a number of suggested changes to the bill, and we have worked closely with them to accept many of those suggestions. I'm going to turn it over to Director McClarion to talk in more detail about a couple specific provisions of the bill, but I wanted to highlight a couple of provisions for the committee. First, as was noted, the bill creates a qualified intermediary program. These are critical to expanding apprenticeship, especially in non-traditional industries and for small businesses. You're going to hear from some of the witnesses later. Although many of us know apprenticeship through the skilled building trades, Maryland has already been growing apprenticeship in many non-traditional fields, including information technology, accounting. We're looking to move more into teaching and nursing. Really, the goal is to fill critical needs where specific technical skills are required for people to move into good paying jobs. And so these intermediaries can be that sort of nexus to help bring everyone together to do that. That said, we recognize it's vital that intermediaries share data to promote transparency and quality as well as innovation. So the program will provide grants to intermediaries to help recruit employers and increase apprenticeship opportunities. Second, the bill establishes the apprenticeship incentive program. This is something we hear about quite a bit. There is an existing tax incentive program. However, it has sunset. It has run out of funds, especially for new businesses who want to join apprenticeships, smaller businesses. They find these incentives very helpful. Additionally, this legislation tackles the issue of ratios. I want to thank Delegate Bawafo, who raised this during last year's legislative session and really initiated this important conversation. The department provided a report. We did a report at your direction. And this act now would codify a standard journey worker to apprenticeship ratio of 1-to-1. That provides clarity and certainty to all stakeholders, especially given the changes happening at the federal level. But it also provides for flexibility and an expedited pathway to addressing expanded ratios in non-hazardous occupations. Finally, we are making investments and structural changes to support the growth of apprenticeship, including at the Maryland Office of Registered Apprenticeship Development, and we're creating a specialized unit to really work closely with employers and try to grow apprenticeship in some of these new fields. We also, the bill is filed, I want to note, included language to allow apprenticeships to stand in for licensure examination requirements among plumbing apprentices. We believe that apprenticeship can and should smooth paths to licensure, but based on reactions that we got to this particular provision, and I will say this provision or something like it exists in some of the other skilled contractor fields, but there were concerns about applying it here, and so we are proposing to withdraw that language to work on that section further in the future. With that, I'll turn it over to Director McClarion, and I thank the committee and request a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the delegate and to the delegation, I should say. My name is Chris McClarion. I serve as the director of the Maryland Apprenticeship Training Program at the Maryland Department of Labor. Our office oversees the development of apprenticeship programs across the state, and we work to register and recruit new businesses and participants to the apprenticeship model. We are the team that's tasked with scaling apprenticeship across the state. Today, I'm testifying in support of House Bill 501, the RAISE Act. I would like to also thank the committee, Governor Moore, Lieutenant Governor Miller, and of course Secretary Wu for the continued prioritization of this work. As Secretary Wu just explained, the RAISE Act supports the expansion of this proven job training model. The bill's provisions will both add tools and expand bandwidth on our existing team, allowing us to deliver on the promise of growing apprenticeships to also help grow Maryland's economy. First, the RAISE Act will deliver the tools for our toolbox that we can use to expand the apprenticeship model, and as we look to grow, it will also help us to maintain high standards of safety and quality while allowing some flexibility, as the Secretary mentioned, with expanded ratio to apprentice to journey worker ratios. In particular, expanding the ratio past a 1-to-1 will be a critical tool for us as we reach out to new industries such as technology, cyber, and administrative. And it will encourage them to launch new apprenticeship programs. And these safe, non-hazardous work pace and expanded ratio does make sense and can be accomplished in a manner that is safe for the workers and for the public. In addition, having strong language in the law will also serve to protect that 1-to-1 ratio that's long been recognized as in occupations that are hazardous, such as occupations in construction and mining. This language also ensures that programs with the hazardous occupations are protected and they're not subject to the whims of the ever-changing positions that are occurring at the federal level. Two additional tools in the RAISE Act offers us to include the Qualified Intermediary Program and the Maryland Apprenticeship Incentive Program. The first program will allow us to work with industry insiders to grow into new occupations, while the second program will act as a carrot to help incentivize employers to try this model out. In terms of bandwidth, the RAISE Act will establish the Maryland Office for Registered Apprenticeship Development to allow the department to move effectively to market apprenticeships, and also will repeal the Youth Apprenticeship Advisory Committee, a committee whose function is duplicative. With that, I respectfully request a favorable report by the committee on House Bill 501. I'm happy to answer any questions, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. My name is Bruce Spector, and I am the chairman of Baltimore Cyber Range, a Maryland-based company dedicated to developing a well-trained cybersecurity workforce to address the 30,000 unfilled cyber positions that exist in Maryland today. Through our Cyber Workforce Accelerator, a partnership with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, we provide hands-on real-world cybersecurity training to address the thousands of job vacancies in this critical sector. I am here to express support for House Bill 501, which expands registered apprenticeships, including in non-traditional industries like cybersecurity. Apprenticeships provide practical on-the-job training while helping businesses build a strong talent pipeline. The Moore administration's effort to scale apprenticeships beyond traditional trades are critical, and the legislation further strengthens that commitment. Baltimore Cyber Range has direct experience with registered apprenticeships. Having successfully operated a program in the past, we are now working to establish a new registered apprenticeship program for Security Operations Centers, or SOCs, a critical need in cybersecurity. Through this work, we understand the unique challenges of apprenticeships in tech, including the lack of standardized training models, and most importantly, the inflexible journeyman to apprenticeship ratios and high training costs. House Bill 501 addresses these challenges by allowing greater flexibility in apprenticeship ratios, enabling more businesses to offer apprenticeships. It also provides financial incentives to help employers with costs related to recruitment, training, and support, making it easier for business to invest in working development. Thank you for your time and consideration, and happy to answer any questions.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and the committee, I'm Joanne Fiore, the VP of Apprenticeships for AICPA and SEMA, a global membership organization with over 600,000 CPAs, CGMAs, and finance and accounting students as our members who work in public practice, private industry, government, nonprofit, and education. In the audience is Tom Hood, CPA, CGMA, a resident of Baltimore City, our EVP. He was formerly the CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs. He testified before the Senate Finance Committee in support of the RAISE Act, and I do so here today. The accounting and finance profession is a high-demand occupation, crucial to the health of our economy, with a vital role in every business, large and small, and we are experiencing both a critical talent shortfall and the need to upskill to meet business needs. To help address this, our association registered the first apprenticeship in finance and accounting at the national level as a finance business partner. We then selected Maryland as the first state to register in, given its reputation as a national leader in apprenticeships. The state supported us in registering and growing our apprenticeship with its expertise, and the Department of Labor provided funding to incentivize our employers. Such intermediary support and funding are key to assisting professions like ours in developing successful apprenticeships that lead to family-sustaining careers. Our apprenticeship experience was so positive that we then launched a youth apprenticeship and then piloted it again in Maryland. The intermediary role is particularly challenging in occupations new to apprenticeships like ours, and we welcome the additional resources, expertise, and oversight the RAISE Act would provide. We ask for a favorable report on HB 501.
Let me ask, we have a state apprenticeship training fund. How would this new program work in conjunction with that fund?
Thank you, sir. The State Apprenticeship Fund does exist. It comes off of contributions made through contractors that are working on prevailing wage projects or that are working on Power Act projects that are funded with state public dollars at a certain percentage rate. So they would work a little bit differently, but there are some overlapping similarities. The Apprenticeship Fund, as it exists today, supports the expansion of apprenticeship within pre-apprenticeship models, colleges, high schools, educational providers such as that. It also provides for the administration, the funding of the apprenticeship program itself.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add, this creates a little bit of additional structure, some additional targeted grant program areas. There is a provision in the governor's budget also leveraging some existing dedicated purpose account funds that had previously been designated by the General Assembly for apprenticeships, specifically to work on this, but we wanted to direct how those funds would be used.
No, I'm only asking this question because I know that's something you guys are involved with. And I want to make sure, because to my knowledge, that fund was very much focused, like this seems to be on Maryland apprenticeships, not out of state, not going out of state, not pulling. We're actually trying to train Marylanders, because I think there's a bill up next. It's a little bit concerning because it seems like it takes away some of that. But I just want to make sure that for this bill, obviously the job is, putting our energy into Maryland employment, Marylanders, not regional, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. And also briefly, we have the MORAD, is that what it's called? That's it.
The Office of Registered Apprenticeship Development, yeah.
And how does that differ from the apprenticeship intermediary program as far as, it seems like they're hunting down businesses that would use apprenticeships? Is that the goals?
So the unit is, and this is something we've heard, frankly, a lot of feedback from employers and industry saying, we need folks who are dedicated to working with industry, to marketing this to, industry, and also explaining it, right? And have specialization in different industries to be able to work with a bunch of different small businesses. Small businesses are busy. They don't have someone to do this full time. They want something that's more plug and play. That's what the intermediary is for. And so that provides sort of a structure that can connect. In the case of the accountants, it's a perfect example. They have maybe the curriculum, their expertise there. Maybe they work with a college to make sure you can get credits there. Then they work with a bunch of employers. So the intermediary is sort of the structure that brings all those pieces together. The MORAD unit is sort of the sales group, basically going out there and working and recruiting employers.
Just because I just want to make sure, with the current budgetary crisis that we're not doing anything duplicative. So, all right, I do believe we have one question. Delegate Sharkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think we're coming. There we go. So I am a huge fan of apprenticeships, and I think when we look sort of at apprenticeships conceptually and the history in this country, you can easily kind of say, like, here's apprenticeships, and here's middle class, really solid middle class jobs that come out of them. But a lot of that is because most of the apprenticeships that we see right now in this country, in this state, are tied to, for the most part, the building trades or other trades. And for a lot of those apprenticeships, they're actually paid for by employers. Like, the structure within the building trades is that employers are paying for those apprenticeships. And the people who kind of come out of that, the licensures that come out of that, then also have a skill set that can be used with multiple different employers. And so all of that makes a lot of sense to me, and I can see that connection between this really strong model and middle class jobs. And as I see that, and I see all of us kind of say, we like that, we want to expand that, I feel like that's kind of where the direction the state of Maryland's going in. But I worry about how much of what's unique to that gets lost in this translation. And so specifically, we're sort of moving to, instead of employers really paying for the apprenticeship that then they're going to benefit from over time, it is the state of Maryland that is essentially subsidizing the apprenticeship. And then I wonder, how much are we subsidizing the equivalent of that apprenticeship with skills that will be recognized across employers? If you're an electrician with an IBW apprenticeship, you can go to any other electrical contractor that gets recognized. If you go through a Royal Farms apprenticeship, it's not clear to me that 7-Eleven and Wawa are gonna bring you in at that same level the way that your electrical apprenticeship kind of crosses all of those boundaries. And so what I worry about is, one is, what are the protections we're putting in place so that, to the chair's point about the amount of money that the state's putting into this, are we just creating a state subsidized training program, which is okay, like workforce development is good, but like, are we really replicating what is so good about the apprenticeships that we can see? Or are we state subsidizing job training, and how are we making sure that the sort of balancing act between labor and employer that apprenticeships in the context of the trades creates, that we have that same balancing act? Because if someone wants to walk away from Royal Farms after the Royal Farms apprenticeship, they're not guaranteed that same sort of skill set is going to be honored at the next convenience store, right? The way that an electrician or a pipe fitter or whoever is when they sort of go from job shop. So those are, and we've had some of this conversation, but I kind of want to be on the record about that. And I want to ask you, as we're taking a huge step and putting a lot of money into this, like, what are the things that the state has in place, can put in place to address those issues?
Thank you, Delegate, and thank you for your support for registered apprenticeship. I will say, as I noted earlier, and I come out of the Joint Apprenticeship Training Fund model, so I worked with those. They were my clients when I was an attorney early on in my career. Absolutely, they are a gold standard. I would say they are, employer and employee funded, right? Because contributions are coming out of your paycheck every week to go support the next generation of apprentices. They do have, they're very closely aligned to licensure pathways as well as experience. you're correct. So part of the reason for having intermediaries is the Joint Apprenticeship Council, serves as that. They're represented by a bunch of different employers and a bunch of workers, so different locals, so you can pull everyone together to understand it's an industry standard. I think we hope that intermediaries will serve that function as well. You're not training an accountant just for working at one place. You're training an accountant to work at multiple places and to get the recognized industry credentials. And absolutely, the Maryland Apprenticeship Training Council, that is their job in approving apprenticeships, is to say, is this, where are the transferable credentials, licensure, certificates that are widely recognized in this industry? Completely agree. You're not supposed to just be training someone to only do a job in one place and nowhere else. Cybersecurity is a good example too. You can train people to get Google certificates or whatever, but you want to make sure they're getting ones that are recognized widely in the industry. But finally, I will say it's important to distinguish apprenticeship from a degree. It is a marker of skill, but it is also attached to a job. So the individual finishing that apprenticeship is not walking away and saying, oh, I just have this Royal Farms manager certificate now. I don't have a job and I haven't had the chance to demonstrate that. They are in a job. And so, of course, I think for a lot of employers, if you're at another retail establishment, you say, what's that person's experience? Like, I want to know they had an apprenticeship, but I want to know they were an experienced manager. They ran that store. They did it for 2 years. Okay, I feel comfortable bringing that person over because I know they have that on-the-job experience. I think, so to your point, I think we understand your point about needing to maintain quality, needing to maintain transparency. A lot of what we want to do with this program is also to report and develop tools to make it easier for sponsors, but also to report on outcomes. That's something we heard a lot from labor about being concerned. We don't want to have watered down standards or be paying for programs that don't provide good jobs. I will say the incentives also are small, right? Like we're talking about maybe $1,500, $2,500 a head. That is not paying for the training. The employers are still going to have to pay for the training because that doesn't go very far. It's just an incentive to get people in the door, do some of the startup costs. So it will still be very much employers are going to have to invest.
And so who's getting the $1,500, $2,000? The employer is getting paid to take somebody and to put them through an apprenticeship?
The sponsor could get as an incentive payment to either add a new apprentice. Depends on who the sponsor is. It could be an individual employer. It could be the intermediary. It could be a college. Am I right, Chris? Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. So an intermediary is being paid $2,000 to find somebody and then put them with a CPA firm. And is that what's happening?
They do more than just put them in there. Like they're starting an apprentice, right? They're adding a new apprentice. The incentives are only for people who are adding new apprentices. So you have to be putting a person on the path and funding them and committing to funding them through that path.
So okay. All right. I guess and so the CPA firm that's getting the apprentice is paying? Who's paying for the cost of the apprenticeship that in the trades context is paid for by the contributions to the training fund?
Yep, and thank you for the question, ma'am. So I'll use a current example that we have. We just finished a very similar fund that was federally funded from U.S. Department of Labor. It was called the SAIR, so a little bit of a different name, but we would reimburse up to $2,500 through the sponsor to the employer of the individual apprentice. At $25, it was a maximum, so if the training costs less, they of course they would get less. But it was a maximum of $2,500 per new apprentice registered within the occupation. And we don't just, in this case, we didn't just give the funding up front. They would have to register the apprentice, hire the apprentice would begin their training, and there was a minimum amount of time they had to serve within the apprenticeship to include starting the courses and things like that before reimbursement could occur. So the funding won't just occur on the front end just because they bring somebody on. Funding always occurs at a given marker once they've accomplished a certain set within the grant deliverables. The other things to note is that, to the Secretary's point, the $2,500 will end up being a very small part of the overall cost of the training because the employer will still have 100% of the wages and benefits will belong to the employer. And if the training were to cost, let's say, $10,000, they would be getting a maximum, in this example, $2,500, and all the rest would fall still to that employer.
I'm still confused about if the $2,500 is going to the sort of matcher.
No, it goes to the sponsor, the person who runs the apprenticeship. Yeah.
Not the company that's taking the person.
It depends on whether they're the sponsor of.
But they could be the sponsor.
They could be the sponsor, right? But they have to cover the costs of the training and of the wages.
Okay.
The employers.
And
Right.
I'll
follow up.
Maybe the CPS could.
Yeah, I'll follow up we had talked about having a follow-up conversation, and we should do that because I still have questions about the best way to do this. And I appreciate your work on it and your expertise, so we'll carry on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't remember whether the chair actually asked this, but he talked a little bit about it. But my question really specifically, what holds, or is there anything, I know we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars here for an individual, but we often educate a lot of people at the University of Maryland. We educate them in our colleges and universities. We're talking about this apprenticeship program. What holds those people after we've spent time and money and energy into getting them up to speed on something? What actually makes them stay in the state of Maryland, or is there any clawback? Is there any look back? Is there any way to ensure that they actually at least perform for a couple of years in the state before they take whatever training that we've invested in them to another region or another jurisdiction outside the state of Maryland?
Delegate, I think what's different, a little bit different from a college degree versus an apprenticeship, is that because the apprenticeship is connected to the job right here in the state, the person is being trained in that workplace and working with that employer, and so that they naturally, they already have a job here, as opposed to you may finish a college degree and then be looking around and looking all over the place. You're right, could someone always change jobs later? But that is, I think, the unique thing and the appealing thing for parents, students, apprentices, and us, and Marylanders, is the job's already right here. So they have a high level of attachment already, which is different, I think, from the college context.
Okay, so what you're stating is they probably wouldn't want to move anyway. Is that what you're saying?
They could always move, but the point is they already have a job, and the apprenticeship is driving them into that specific job in Maryland already.
Okay, thank you.
And USDOL statistics show retention, 93% are retained after 1 year, 93% are still on the job.
Did you say 93?
The USDOL keeps good statistics on retention.
Okay. That's great, thank you.
As part of the apprenticeship process, the apprentice is spending 80% of his time working with a mentor in that organization. He understands the company he's with, he understands his role, he understands what his function is, and he's comfortable by the time he reaches the full-time position. He's no longer apprentice. And one of the strengths of the program is the retention factor.
Yeah, I mean, 93% is really, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Seeing no more questions for this panel. Move on to Chris Bondi, John Colburn, Jennifer Sproul, Jason Perkins Cohen, and Tim House.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Vice Chair, committee members, my name is Chris Biondi. I am the training director for the Washington, D.C. Joint Plumbing Apprenticeship Committee. We are an 80-year trade apprenticeship, training plumbers and gas fitters to work with throughout Maryland. We are one of those strong building trades apprenticeships that was mentioned. We are a part of a 135-year-old union. We are supporting with amendments. We had some concerns about the, we had initially had some concerns about some of the language in there, but we're supporting now because we've seen the ratio that we wanted to see, the 1-to-1 that was critical. Our apprentices learn consistently throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year by benefiting, working with a mentor nonstop. It's absolutely important to the way we learn and the way we train our apprenticeships. Apprentices having a lower ratio than that could be dangerous. So these are folks that are working with plumbing, they're working with water, they're working with natural gas. So we wanted to ensure that we had that 1-to-1 ratio. That's nicely locked in. The finances, we're 100% funded. Our apprenticeship is paid for, but one thing that's critical for us is seeing that there's money that supports other workforce development, essentially creating a pipeline to our apprenticeship. And so we work closely with those groups. We want to make sure that keeps going. and that's supported. So Washington, D.C. Joint Plumbing Apprenticeship Committee does support with amendments. Thank you.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and distinguished members of the House Economic Matters Committee, my name is Tim House, and I am Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Wireless Infrastructure Association. We represent more than 200 companies involved in the design, construction, operation, and support of broadband and telecommunications networks encompassing more than 500,000 facilities globally. I'm here to express our strong support for the RAISE Act, as this proposed legislation contains provisions that closely resemble the industry intermediary model embraced by the U.S. Department of Labor, of which we have been a part of since 2020. WIA has sought to address the skills gap challenge in our industry for more than a decade, beginning in 2014 with the launch of the Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Program, or TIRAP. And with resources from the Department of Labor, TIRAP rapidly expanded from less than a dozen companies to now 107 participating employers and 16 DOL-approved occupations. We have created sustainable career paths and promoted workforce safety and quality to nearly 6,000 apprentices in a very short period of time. The RAISE Act closely aligns with our mission, and we believe it will help enable the rapid expansion of registered apprenticeship in Maryland, which is my home state. This legislation could serve as a model for other states, and together through intermediaries help to support the next generation of telecommunications professionals. WIA and our participating employers are committed to ensuring this legislation's success. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon, members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Jennifer Deweese. I am the president of the Maryland Center for Construction Education Innovation, co-founder and construction lead of the Maryland Apprenticeship Connector, and chairperson of the Maryland Workforce Alliance. I'm here to testify in strong support of the RAISE Act of 2025. Maryland has set an ambitious and necessary goal to significantly increase the number of registered apprenticeships to 60,000 by 2030. If we're serious about meeting that goal and closing our workforce gaps, we must fully embrace the role of apprenticeship intermediaries in scaling our efforts. Intermediaries serve as the bridge between employers, educators, and workers. They take on the critical work of guiding businesses, many of whom have never considered apprenticeships, through the complexities of program registration, compliance, and implementation. The new Registered Apprenticeship Qualified Intermediary Program proposed in this legislation will provide the structure and funding needed to connect more Maryland employers with this proven workforce solution. The reality is that too many employers still see apprenticeships as bureaucratic hurdles rather than strategic investments. That perception must change. For decades, our society has defaulted to a college-for-all mindset, treating a four-year degree as the only path to success. As Rick Wartzman wrote in The Failure of College for All, we built an entire economy and hiring system around the idea that only those with a degree are worthy of good jobs. This approach has left countless capable workers behind while creating critical labor shortages in fields that don't require a degree but do require hands-on training and skill development. If we want to meet Maryland's workforce needs, we must change public perception and hiring practices to reflect the undeniable value of apprenticeships. Employers need to recognize that as an apprenticeship graduate is just as prepared, if not more so, than someone coming out of a four-year degree program. Apprenticeships provide direct pipelines to skilled talent, reduce turnover, and increase productivity, all while offering Marylanders access to high-quality career pathways. By passing the RAISE Act, we will not only expand apprenticeships across industries, but also provide the necessary financial and technical support to ensure that employers can get easily engaged. I urge your full support of the RAISE Act.
Chair Wilson and the committee, my name is John Colborn, and I represent Apprenticeships for America. We're a national nonprofit organization representing apprenticeship stakeholders from across the country. Our mission is to expand pathways to good jobs and careers and address the skill shortages of employers by dramatically expanding apprenticeships. And I want to commend your consideration of the RAISE Act and urge a favorable report on the bill. Let me first applaud Maryland, the legislature, and the governor for your support of apprenticeship to date, and the work of the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program. AFA recently conducted an analysis of state progress on apprenticeships, and Maryland compares favorably to other states with an above-average representation of apprenticeships in the labor market, and Maryland's also the 6th fastest growing apprenticeship program over the last decade. Maryland's made significant progress in expanding apprenticeships to new occupations and industries, and its growing efforts to connect young people to apprenticeships. The RAISE Act will sustain and build on this momentum. The RAISE Act also represents best practices internationally. Our evidence on how apprenticeships grow in other countries shows that 2 elements are really key to expanding apprenticeships. The first is a sustained and predictable formula-based incentive, as reflected in the Maryland Apprenticeship Incentive Program. And second, a developed system of organizations that work with employers to remove the pain points in placing and developing apprentices, which would be advanced by the Registered Apprenticeship Qualified Intermediary Program. Finally, I wish to commend the proposal to expand the journey person to apprentice ratio in non-hazardous occupations. None of the European apprenticeship programs we studied use ratio requirements, which makes the U.S. an outlier. And flexibility in ratios will support expansion of apprenticeship to new occupations and make apprenticeships work for small business. Thank you.
Seeing no question, that concludes this panel. Thank you very much. Now we have Tom O'Keefe, Donna Edwards, Ray Baker, and Adrian Andrews.
You want to go? No, no.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I was just here, wasn't I? Thank you very much. Donna Edwards, President of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. I'd like to say that we've been working closely and appreciate the governor's office for starting the conversations with us in December. I have met with the governor's office, with public employee unions, as well as our building trade unions. The amendments that we provided in my testimony reflect what we thought was the agreement, except over ratios. We're never going to agree on that because we really want to have a high integrity of apprentice being graduated from and having fulfilling careers in what they were trained to do. So there's a couple issues that I want to throw out. I just heard, a mention of the European models. I was part of the 2030. I've listened to all of the reports from New Zealand, UK, Germany, Australia, et cetera. One of the things that's missing is that they always have the government, the unions, and the businesses at the table doing this work. And I didn't hear that mentioned as far as the unions go. Secondly is the development of a lot of the focus from 2030, as well as this bill, is on developing intermediaries and sponsors. We definitely need to have transparency and tracking. That is the one thing we want, because I think the outcome is to have middle-class workers coming out of these programs. That's just not where the focus is. And I know the question was asked, what kind of tracking? Well, that was 93% or 98% on a year. We want to know that once they're graduated, that they have had all of this progressive wages, they are in a meaningful career, and they are there with the job that they were trained to do, and it is a middle-class job and life that we've created. Otherwise, we're throwing money away again in an economy where Maryland is next to last in job development. So we want to develop good jobs and track jobs that are meaningful to our economy. So with that, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee members, my name is Ray Baker. I serve as the Maryland Director of the Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades. You guys have my written testimony, so I will not belabor us by enunciating and elucidating each point. We are favorable with amendments. A number of those amendments, we have been in conversation with our leaders of the AFL-CIO and the administration around, and we look forward to continuing to working with the administration on those amendments, except for the question of ratio. As we've heard before, it becomes problematic for us on a number of different points. We also have questions around the definition and the clarity of hazardous versus non-hazardous positions. We would like clarity on that, and we have issue and question about leaving it at the discretion of the secretary. With all due respect to our current secretary, God forbid there be a day where there's a secretary who is not as aligned with us on our issues and concerns, and they have that decision-making that could and would be problematic for us. And so we continue to look forward to working with you all as a committee, working with the administration, our partners at the AFL-CIO, and business as well, to come together to reach happy and sufficient amendments for all of us that will protect our workers and lead to the middle-class jobs and opportunity that President Edwards alluded to. And in that vein, we ask for a favorable report with amendments to this bill. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, members of the committee. My name is Kevin O'Keefe, here on behalf of Independent Electrical Contractors Chesapeake, which is headquartered in Laurel, Maryland. We currently have approximately about 1,000 electrician apprentices. You have a written statement. We support this bill and support Governor Moore's efforts to expand apprenticeship in Maryland. But 3 points I want to make on this bill. On page 3, lines 8 through 20, although I guess they're no longer going to waive the examination requirements for some skills, trades. We just want to make sure if there's future licenses, such as low voltage, that if that were the case, that they could be given license without examination and that they would be eligible for that. And then on pages 5 and 6, it's unfortunate, we believe, that they're doing away with the Youth Apprenticeship Advisory Council, because it's a good way to get younger people involved in apprentices, we believe. And then the final point we want to make is on page 27, 28, on page 10, and lines 1 to 3 on page 11, to reduce from 7 months to 3 months that an apprentice would have to be employed in order to be eligible for the credit, because we think that would give employers more flexibility in terms of hiring throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Delegate Harrison, is there one more?
Yes, one more. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and committee members. My name is Adrienne Andrews, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Workforce Alliance and strongly support the RAISE Act. The Maryland Workforce Alliance represents a diverse group of management and labor organizations from cybersecurity to the Marine Trades Association. The RAISE Act is crucial, as we all know, for strengthening Maryland's economy and creating sustainable employment pathways. We know the positive outcomes of apprenticeships, including improved productivity and reduced turnover. And I just want to name how I see this triple bottom line for the RAISE Act. It carries this bottom line of providing Marylanders with access to family-sustaining and dignified careers, building on decades of work to create that education-to-job pipeline. We all deserve that. All of our residents deserve that. It streamlines resources so that businesses can expand and develop a skilled workforce tailored to their needs. And it strengthens our state's economic competitiveness and builds on our national leadership as a highly educated state, affirming that everyone deserves an education that allows them to support their families. In 2023, Maryland had over 5,500 new apprentices, ranking 12th highest nationally. I see the RAISE Act building upon this progress, creating a more robust and inclusive economy, and we also support the data transparency needed to move this forward holistically as many apprenticeships across the board, moving them into employment and sustaining that employment. And then just another piece on aligning this aligns directly with Governor Moore's economic growth agenda. We know we need economic growth in our state, and those strategic investments in strengthening our competitiveness nationally. And then it addresses our businesses' needs. We talk about talents, tools, and technology, and aligning these talent and tools and helping folks build pathways to work, wages, and wealth for Marylanders is key and one of our top priorities. So MWA urges this committee to support the RAISE Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, I just wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you were indicating that if there was a different Secretary of Labor, that could be a hindrance, so, and you were recommending an amendment to that. What is your suggestion? Because I don't see it in your testimony, in your written testimony.
Well, certainly, first, we take issue with the question of the expanded ratios altogether. And so because the definition of non-hazardous occupations that would fall under the purview of expanded ratios is something that our industry, the building trades, are against completely. And so ideally, we would not like, forgive me for interrupting you, Delegate, my apologies.
No, I was just going to, but what I heard you say, the thing that I picked up on, you said that if there were, you didn't want the Secretary of Labor to have that decision.
Certainly.
Is that what you said? First of all, let me make sure, is that what you said?
I did reference the Secretary of Labor.
Okay.
I specifically referenced the Secretary of Labor. Excuse me, I did reference the Secretary of Labor because as the bill is, it provides the discretion for expanding ratios to the Secretary of Labor.
Okay.
Primarily, the building trades do not want expanded ratios.
Okay.
Second thought, I'm sorry, I continue to.
I keep cutting you off.
My second thought is, we have this, because we've, in offering that decision-making autonomy to the Secretary of Labor, that becomes a bit of a question because the Secretary of Labor as is someone who's working with us in ways that we very much appreciate and are grateful for with regards to this bill. If it were not this Secretary of Labor who were working with us in that way, they may run over our wishes for not expanding ratios and then expand it into industries in which we do not want them expanded into anyway.
Okay, well, let's just say that we get that it stays in the bill about the ratios. Who would you want to have that discretion?
Am I allowed to say I don't want it expanded in the first place and thus?
Well, no, you've already said that.
Certainly, and so then Delegate, then let me be clear then. We don't want expanded ratios, period. Okay. And the attribution of who would have that decision-making, that can all go to the side. I push that away. I am sorry for saying that initially. Let me now say this clearly and unequivocally, and this will trump what I've said before. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to clear that up. I appreciate this. Please, no expanded ratios.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to follow up with my good friend from Prince George's County, since we had great discussion about this. Mr. Baker, remind me what group you're with again?
The Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades.
Building Trades. And so, the 2030 Commission, in conjunction with the Department of Labor, is who comes up with that list of what we deem as non-hazardous. Are any of your jobs affected by that in the non-hazardous list as it lists currently today?
So as we've been, first, in fairness to the administration and the Department of Labor, they've been very good partners to continue to listen to us and work with us on this, and I look forward to continuing to work with them and having them hear us out and engage them on this. Second, there were some occupations that were on the list that were deemed non-hazardous that some of our affiliates were concerned this could be interpreted as such. Some of our members do similar work, and we have questions about what other occupations may appear on that list. And so, are there some of our affiliates that have been on that list? Not explicitly right now, but yes, the work that some of us do can appear there.
So they can appear there, but let me just be clear for the record, none of them appear there in the current list that exists because it was the 2030 Commission, in which you do have influence over, and the Department of Labor in conjunction who came up with this. I understand your objection in principle that you don't want ratios expanded, but let me just give you an example. If we're talking about painters, do you think that a business needs to hire a one-to-one apprenticeship for a painter?
Yes.
Okay, and that's your industry's belief?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so to piggyback off of Delegate Harrison's point, how else would we want this to be expanded? Do you want it to be the 2030 Commission in conjunction with the Secretary of Labor? Because all you're saying is let's not expand apprenticeships. And the conversation we're having is about making sure businesses, especially in our county, who have talked a lot about making sure that those non-hazardous businesses aren't expanded. So curious on your thoughts on that.
Sure. How you asking me how I would like it expanded is akin to me understanding you asking me how I would like for you to cut my finger. I would prefer you do not cut my finger. Well, to answer your question, though, as far as what's on the list, for some of those, one such position was like, there was deemed, if I'm not mistaken, a refrigeration technician. There's question about refrigeration technicians, in which if we're working on commercial and large-scale projects, that would be on the list as non-hazardous. However, that does fall under A, our building trades, and 2, that does become hazardous work. And so the negotiation around that questions about industry positions and job titles such as those are some of the things that I'm alluding to. That is work that we have been doing with the administration. I would like us to continue to do, and I would like that amendments that to this bill to be produced be reflective of that.
Can we give Ms. Edwards an opportunity to chime in here? Thank you.
I appreciate that, because just beyond the building trade argument of the ratios, there is an issue between non-hazardous and hazard. And I've had this conversation with DOL, because the list comes out from the United States DOL, and we are literally, and it's historical, let's do that. And we are looking to expand apprenticeships. And believe me, collectively, we all believe, and totally, that apprenticeships is the way to go to get into a middle-class job. And so the thing, though, that's happening as we expand apprenticeships, some things on the list have to do with healthcare. And if you go to the CDC list, it says this is hazardous. This can explode in your face. And so there's not the combination, and we do a lot in cybersecurity. We do a lot of aeronautic engineers. And so from our point of view of the AFL-CIO, just saying hazard, non-hazard isn't a good ratio thing, because there's other places we need to look for the hazard, because we are expanding.
Right.
So that's, exactly. We're growing and expanding. And we have to take it, rather than just have lists that are concrete, they may change. But our traditional, we know what is hazardous now. We know that we're going to lose a finger or, get shocked and lose something else. We know those. But going forward, we have to include a lot of other information.
And Donna, I get in principle the positioning from expanding ratios, right? You believe that once the ball starts rolling, it can potentially roll and impact anyone. I do get that. But year 2 of having this discussion, when it comes to non-hazardous occupations, we have to come up with a process instead of just saying, no, we don't want it to be one-to-one. And so I implore you guys to come up with a process on what you would like the DOL, this committee, and others to do to take into effect on how we can start approving those that can be one-to-one and not expanding it to others that may be actually hazardous. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Don.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, do you support it says the board shall waive the examination requirements? Do you support?
No.
No. Okay.
You have to have a written test when you get a driver's license. So if I can prove to you that I can drive, why should I have to take a drive? Why do we have them take the test? We take the test to know that you know all of the code and all of the regulations of why it is that you are installing something that way, or you are doing your job that way. As a social worker, I had to take the test. Okay, so I'm not for doing away with tests.
That's music to my ears, because it's my understanding that portion of that test, I think 25% of that test is about gas. Isn't that correct?
You would have to ask an expert on that one.
Okay,
I take that, but no.
And I will, because I know a portion of also part of that certification is about backflow, which is very, very dangerous.
No, you're absolutely right. It is. It's a dangerous occupation.
Okay.
And that's why we want to test, so you know why it is you're doing what you do.
Excellent. Thank you.
This panel, I know we do have one.
Thank you again.
Thank you, and I believe we have one favorable amendment virtual. Charlie Petrovia.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman Wilson and committee. My name is Charlie Petrovia, and I am the training director of Local 486 Plumbers and Steam Fitters Training School. On behalf of the United Association of Plumbers and Steam Fitters 486 Training School, we represent over 2,000 plumbers, steam fitters, welders, HVAC techs across Maryland. I'm asking you to support House Bill 501 with the amendments. As an organization, we have concerns regarding several aspects of the proposed legislation. At the Plumbers and Steamfitters Training School, our apprenticeships are a point of pride. Our members complete a rigorous 5-year program, which includes over 1,200 hours of classroom instruction and 10,000 hours of on-the-job training. Our programs throughout the UA are widely regarded as the gold standard for registered apprenticeship programs across the country. However, being a registered program should not only be a baseline requirement. Apprentices graduating from the program must possess deep knowledge of the craft, along with a solid understanding of plumbing and fuel gas codes, which are an integral part to their training. The only way to ensure this is through a licensing exam based on the code, and as it has already been implemented. We respectfully urge that the exemption for this exam be removed from legislation. Also, the importance of maintaining a 1-to-1 ratio of journeyman to apprentice on the job sites could not be overstated. A journeyman is responsible for ensuring that the apprentice completes tasks safely, thereby protecting the public, the apprentice, and other co-workers on job sites. The current ratio is already quite low. Any reduction to this ratio could compromise public safety and overall quality of the work in our industries. Plumbing and gas fitting are complex, increasingly sophisticated trades. They incorporate modern tools, materials, and systems. A seasoned journeyman should supervise no more than one apprentice to ensure proper mentoring. The approach has been effective for over a century.
Sir, I'm going to need you to wrap it up, sir. And your time has been up, so if you could just wrap it up for me, please.
Yes, sir. We urge you to support House Bill 501 with the amendments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. That concludes this, the speaker, and it concludes this hearing. Now on to the next bill, please. House Bill 1017, Delegate Wells. Do you have a panel? Please, if you have a panel, because I do have questions.
Okay. All right. I think some of the people are virtual.
I'm sorry?
Sorry. Let me use the mic. I think some of the panel is virtual, but.
The experts you'll have are virtual?
Possibly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, sure. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Melissa Wells, and I'm here to testify on House Bill 1017, the Maryland Workforce Apprenticeship Utilization Act. House Bill 1017 would require that contractors and subcontractors that employ 4 or more individuals on covered prevailing wage public work projects use apprentices for 20% of the work hours. So just repeating, that's 20% of work hours for that covered craft. And so we've used the percent of hours to reflect the diversity of labor needs across different crafts. For instance, you only need 1 person to operate a tower crane versus 4 or 5. So the bill is written in a way that's supposed to provide, to accommodate for the different needs of various employers and covered industries of work. So after dropping this legislation, we did have a chance to look at the fiscal note and notice a couple of things I think need to be clarified in a couple of areas where I think the fiscal note may have gotten some things incorrect. First, this legislation does not get rid of the State Apprenticeship Training Fund. That was something that was in the language last year. This bill was heard in HGO. I think the ECM was the secondary. But that was not ever our intent with the bill to get rid of the State Apprenticeship Training Fund. And so this bill does not do that. We worked hard to make sure that we kept the State Apprenticeship Training Fund intact. And there's a lot of value to that fund in terms of helping the state expand access to workforce development programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. The legislation does provide an exemption, a waiver that has other specific guidance on how that waiver is given that would allow individuals that seek that waiver under this legislation to put to put money into the state apprenticeship training fund. So it would help us continue to add more resources, add more dollars to that fund. The legislation, one of the things that I think we need more clarification and conversation with DLS is around the topic of the covered projects. This legislation does apply to prevailing wage projects, which that threshold is at $250,000. I think the reason why they flag the covered projects is because currently, for the State Apprenticeship Training Fund, it's projects of $500,000 or more in which they add those dollars to that fund. So I think that's where they're kind of conflating what a covered project is. And then thirdly, this bill does not require, this only applies to prevailing wage projects. So any project that is subject to the exemption, like the Baltimore City Community College, Maryland Stadium Authority, and so on and so forth, those projects are not covered under this legislation. Again, that is something that was in the bill last year, and we worked to fix it. So we're going to work with DLS to get to kind of get those questions ironed out. That way they can provide an updated fiscal note to the body. So, you know, I'm following on the governor's, the raise bill. So I know you all just heard for the past hour or so, about an hour. Yeah. About the importance of investing in registered apprenticeship, not only in construction, but in other industries. And the state of Maryland currently invests nearly around $600 million to support workforce development programs. That does include apprenticeship expansion, as well as supporting employers. But the missing piece, though, is that the state does not create a minimum standard of participation of these heavily state and industry invested apprentices. So think of this legislation as the missing piece of this investment strategy. And while we have invested in building the supply of apprentices, and we are being implored to provide more investment in that, as we just heard in the previous bill, my legislation is focusing on supporting the demand of use of apprentices. So in your written testimony and from our speakers today, you will hear from a variety of industries who use apprentices and why these programs not only matter for the reasons stated previously, but because many of these industries are facing workforce shortages. So by passing HB 1017, we are not only creating these pathways to careers, but we are expanding apprenticeship opportunities. And in addition, I know that you will hear from some unfavorable testimony regarding that this will cause projects to cost more. I think I take those concerns very, very seriously, and I'm open to working with the committee to address them. I think this is a very nuanced discussion. It is not as black and white as some may make it seem. We know that there are cost savings to contractors when they use apprentices, because apprentices are paid a portion of the prevailing wage that a journey worker receives. And oftentimes contractors, they add the use of apprentices into their bid proposals, because it does also factor into cost savings. We also know that the state is providing a lot of support to help offset the cost of industries that are looking to take on apprentices or to establish registered apprenticeship programs. Yes, and we also know there's other models out there in terms of like multi-employer models that provide basically a cost-sharing model that contractors and employers can work together to offset the cost of apprenticeship. So I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had about how we can make this work, not just about how it could not work. And I'm open to that conversation. And so again, as I stated earlier in my testimony, this legislation, think of it as a missing piece of the state's $600 million investment strategy in workforce and industry. And while we have invested in building the supply of apprentices, let's really focus on how we can look at supporting the demand of apprentices. And so with that, I look forward to the questions from the committee, and I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1017. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Ray Baker, Maryland Director, Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades. We ask for a favorable report on HB 1017. The building trades for more than a century have been running registered apprenticeships that provide valuable and important pathways to middle-class jobs for a number of workers in the skilled trade industry. We believe that this bill will continue to unlock opportunity for a number of workers throughout Maryland, and we encourage and ask for a favorable report on this bill. The sponsor has given so much detail and delineation that I have no need to add anything beyond our additional support in all of the impactful ways that this could provide meaningful jobs and substantial opportunity to a number of workers across Maryland, thus asking for a favorable report on 1017.
Okay.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson and members of the Economic Matters Committee. Thank you for allowing me the time to testify in support for HB 1017, the Apprenticeship Utilization Act 2025. My name is Rochelle Ramsey Walker, and as an apprentice enrolled in the commercial painting program at the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, I believe that this legislation holds the key to shaping a brighter future for apprentices like myself and the entire construction workforce in Maryland. This legislation emphasizes diversity and inclusion within the construction industry, providing opportunities for individuals like myself who may have faced barriers in the past. It creates a more accessible pathway, not just for women, but for minorities and individuals from different backgrounds to enter and thrive in the construction trades. Job security is of the utmost importance, especially in this day and age that we live in now. And this act focuses on apprenticeship utilization, not only securing our present opportunities, but also ensuring a thriving workforce for years to come. By investing in apprenticeships, we contribute to long-term success and sustainability of the construction industry in Maryland. My experience as an apprentice has been marked not only by skill development, but also personal growth. This act reinforces the importance of our roles, encouraging a sense of commitment and professionalism that extends beyond our apprenticeship journey. It sets the stage for a fulfilling and promising career in the construction trades. As a college graduate, it was very difficult to find work and to be able to support my growing family. But through apprenticeship pathways, I've been able to sufficiently support my family. I want to thank Delegate Wells for sponsoring HB 1017, the Apprenticeship Utilization Act. As an apprentice, I support this legislation because I believe that it will not only positively impact my journey, but also contribute to the overall success and vitality of the construction industry for women and all workers from all walks of life in our great state. I urge you to support HB 1017. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You did a wonderful job. I do have some questions. The delegate, I guess, obviously you have a panel you can refer to. I just want to start out with just, there were some parts of the bill that has concerned me. The first part, currently we already have, I don't think anybody here is against apprenticeships. We have an apprenticeship training fund now. Mm-hmm. And it was supervised by the Department of Labor. And I think the way it's completely self-funded at about 25 cents per labor hour fee on any contractor on a public works project who doesn't employ apprenticeships. That's the current model, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't think that that model is sufficient?
No, that's not, I'm not saying that that model isn't sufficient. What this bill is doing is focusing on how do we increase the demand for apprentices. So I believe that that model is complementary to what this bill is trying to do.
And I say that because, this fund has already led to a creation of multiple apprenticeships. And while your bill doesn't really get rid of it, on line 8, page 8, line 25, it does delete that option for the contractor to make those payments. So while it may exist in name, it doesn't seem like it's going to be well funded anymore.
I believe, because I'll be honest, Mr. Chair, I was reading back through the bill again yesterday because I worked very diligently with the drafter, and I was explicit that we do not want to delete that state apprenticeship training fund. I believe that there is another area in which it's just referred to as the fund, and I cannot find it.
So it's not your intent to stop that 25 cent per hour to go?
Not at all. No.
So you still want that 25
Correct.
Cent on top of what you're asking for, right?
Yes, and that is for, but that fund that you're speaking of, or excuse me, as it currently exists, 25 cent piece is not just for prevailing wage projects. I believe that is for.
Sure. That's why I'm saying that's my concern is because, but the way it's written, it would pretty much defund that project.
So
that program.
I'm happy to work with the committee on this because I did see it yesterday, but I believe that there is an area where it says the fund and then it further defines what the fund is. Yes. And it refers to as that.
But you see the vagaries that I'm trying to work with. That's fine. As long as that's not your intent, that's
correct.
That's fine.
Correct. Yep.
And we talked about the 20% if there's a project with more than 4 people, so I guess 5 people, so why not, in this case, you know, now the size of the project, it's a building a road, something 200 feet in the air, you know, that at that point you think that 1 of every 5 workers should be an apprentice?
You said 1 of every, well, no. So actually what this does is it just simply says that 20% of those hours should be done by an apprentice. So that could be done by 1 apprentice.
So if there are 4, if there is more, the rule is more than 4, right?
If there's 4 or more people, 20% of hours done by an apprentice.
Right, so if there's 4 people, the theory is 1 of those people has to be an apprentice.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And they have to do 20% of the work.
No, they should be completing 20% of the work hours. So we're talking about hours. We're not, so we know that the average work hour for, in construction, they're working 8 to 10 hours a day. So we're talking about total work hours on the project.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that if 4 or more people, that 20%, no matter what they're doing, if they're up on a bridge, you know, scaffolding, doing whatever, that 20% of all of that work should be done by an apprentice.
20% of work hours. I think.
Am I missing something here?
Well, we're talking about time versus the completion of
Sure.
it.
So if they're working on a bridge, won't those hours be done on that bridge?
Yes, they would be. I guess, I think, so.
I was looking for a yes. I was looking for a yes from you that you wanted.
Yes, they would be done on the bridge, but I guess I'm not completely following your questioning.
I was saying that basically if there are more than 4 people, so we'll go with 5, 1 of those 5 people must be an apprentice. Because there has to be an apprentice and they have to do 20% of the work.
Yes.
And where did you get the percentage at?
So we called a few apprenticeship programs, and so we started at 20% of hours. We figured that was a good start to think about meaningful opportunity for apprentices, and you know, and even possibly the cost savings for the contractor as well. But I'm open to conversation about, you know, perhaps numbers that people think might be better.
And that's fine. I'm trying to just get to where your head's at. Again, feel free. I'm not targeting you. You just happen to be in the way of my questions.
No worries. I'm no stranger to your questions, Mr. Chair.
And so I guess there's, on the cost, I guess we can discuss that another time. But basically, if the contractor can't meet that requirement, they're assessed $100 penalty per work hour, right?
That's what it's stated as. Again, I'm open to negotiation on that.
Okay, and they could also be subject to damage under the Maryland False Claims Act.
So there's a aspect of this in which they have to apply for the waiver.
Yeah.
And so all that would be things that would go into effect if they, you know, said they couldn't, you know, if they lied or what have you.
Sure.
Or they didn't pursue a waiver and they didn't use the apprentice.
Just said, I couldn't find any without doing the work.
Correct.
I got it. And I guess my biggest problem with this bill is basically talk about if a company doesn't have enough apprentices, they can go get a waiver. But the way I read your program is the apprentice program does not have to be in Maryland. Because the current fund, the Maryland, I wrote it down, the current Maryland Apprentice Fund is specifically for Marylanders. And it's very specific in the way it's written. But your bill says that it has a geographic area of operation that includes geographic area of the project. So that could be Philadelphia, Delaware, Washington, D.C., whereas the current fund that we have in existence is only for Marylanders. Is it your intent for us to go outside of Maryland for these apprenticeships?
So I think we use the term geographic area because there is a little bit of portability across jurisdictions, right? In terms of Marylanders that live here that might be an apprenticeship program that could be headquartered in DC. But our intent though is that, my personal intent is that we continue to support Marylanders working, you know, getting an apprenticeship and what have you. So I'm happy to work to kind of clarify that language better, but we also didn't want to limit, because we also don't want to put a demand on contractors in which they need to get a worker to do it, to get the job done, and they need an apprentice. So we're trying to balance.
But currently the way we did it, if they can't, they just pay into the fund, because sometimes they can't. Because like under the current state finance procurement 17604 C and D, it requires that apprenticeship funds are used solely to improve and expand apprenticeship programs in the state. And my biggest fear about this bill is that we're going to that it's going to be New Jersey. We're going to go versus we're going to give Maryland money to beef up New Jersey or Delaware's apprenticeship programs, which I would hope is not our intent.
No.
And that's why I was wondering why you didn't just copy that language to ensure that we're in Maryland.
That's not the intent, and I think what that was written for was to give some flexibility to like some of the location. I think, but overall though, I do want to be clear that the State Apprenticeship Training Fund, we're not asking for that fund to help fund.
I know.
Yeah, okay, so I just want to make sure because.
But it is Maryland dollars that will be going out of state to other states, currently as drafted, to other states' apprenticeship programs.
I'd have to look deeper into it, but the intent is that we are not asking for, we are not designating how the fund should be, this bill, at least, and how I believe it's written, and perhaps there's some areas that might say otherwise. This bill is not telling the state that they should put money towards those apprentices that are covered on those projects, in which they would be required to use 20% of the hours.
I'm sorry?
What I'm saying is that my bill is not at all supposed to, let me say supposed to, indicate how State Apprenticeship Training Fund dollars should be utilized.
I agree, but the other bills were, and they said they had to be used in state. Your bill says geographic area of operation to include geographic area of the project.
When you say other bills, which bills are you referring to?
I'm sorry, the other Maryland funds are requiring you actually invest back into Maryland.
Yes, so I am not changing anything about how the State Apprenticeship Training Fund can be used.
So, so are you adverse to us changing the language to make sure that that we have to use apprenticeship programs that are in Maryland? Because you were said before about that portability. But that's my concern.
Yes, so I was only referring to, I don't disagree with using those dollars. I believe we should use Maryland dollars for Marylanders.
Right.
I only referred to the geographic piece, portability, because we know that oftentimes there's certain things that have to get done in which perhaps we can't find that person here.
Right, and then they would apply for a waiver, right?
Correct.
And that's what I'm saying. I just want to make sure that, and I understand because we draft these bills, they don't always go the way we wanted to. And I wanted to make sure it is not your intent to go outside of Maryland to beef up other apprenticeships. Then we can regulate it to where they're only using Maryland apprenticeships, right? That the funds are only going for Maryland apprenticeship programs, right?
Yes.
You don't mind that?
For the State Apprenticeship Training Fund?
No, for your bill.
I don't mind that. I mean, my bill doesn't speak to how those dollars are used.
I agree, but we'd like it to be.
Oh, you want to add it to my bill?
I want to make sure that if something goes through, that we're
thank you.
only using it to benefit Maryland apprenticeship programs.
Sure.
Great, that's all. I just want to make sure.
I was thinking you were asking something else.
No, and, yeah, I just want to make sure we're not supporting out-of-state programs with Marylander dollars.
Okay.
Do we have any? Wow, no questions. All right, great job.
Thank you.
And now we have the unfavorables, Chris Hadfield and Michael Adams.
Chairman, Vice Chair, committee members, thank you for your time today. My name is Chris Hadfield. I'm Vice President of Workforce for ABC Greater Baltimore. I have many volunteer commitments as well. One of them is sitting on the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. I'm here today representing Associated Builders and Contractors. We do have a concern about everything that's been talked about regarding how this bill might affect the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Fund. So I wanted to take the opportunity to share with the committee some, real world success stories of what we've been able to do with that fund. So I'll be brief, but in 2013, when this fund kicked off, since then we've been able to build one of the largest multi-craft construction training centers in the region. We built that in Baltimore City, in the heart of the city, by Johns Hopkins University in East Baltimore. We've been able to double the amount of our apprentices since 2013. We've created several pre-apprenticeship programs, which are extremely important considering building a pipeline into the industry. One of those pre-apprenticeship programs is for post-high school grads. Another one that I was able to start this year was for existing high school students in schools that do not offer construction pathways. So we all know that that is an issue. We need more high schools to offer construction pathways and careers and to help young people enter careers in the trades. We've also been able to create post-apprenticeship programs like Young Leaders programs, management training programs, and I wanted to touch on that because I think that's very important, that as a direct result of this fund, we've been able to create an experience for apprentices, which helps build the stigma of the industry. We're not a one-stop shop. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair Wilson, members of the committee. Michael Adams on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors. I want to piggyback on what Mr. Hatfield said, because under this bill, as it's written, it would effectively destroy that program that is funded through ABC. I appreciate the sponsor's intent. I think it is a good one, but this bill has a long way to go if it is something that's not going to be detrimental to the state of Maryland and apprenticeships generally. Currently, a contractor on a public works project may participate in an approved apprenticeship scheme or, alternatively, pay 25 cents per labor hour to an approved Maryland apprenticeship program. These Maryland programs employ Marylanders and are audited regularly by the Department of Labor. Those provisions were passed in 2009 as a part of a collaborative effort between ABC, the AFL-CIO, the Department of Labor, and the Maryland Minority Contractors Association. This bill undoes, as written, the 25-cent an hour requirement, and with it, the funding for those apprenticeship programs. It replaces that common sense approach with an arbitrary requirement that a contractor employ 20% apprentices on public works projects, regardless of whether that number is actually feasible. If a contractor can't meet that requirement, as written, they must request apprentices from a training program in the geographic area, as the chair highlighted. That doesn't mean Maryland. In fact, existing language protecting Maryland apprenticeship programs is specifically stripped out of existing law in this bill on page 9, line 15. If a contractor violates the law as proposed in this bill, they are then subject to a $100 per labor hour fine and subject to trouble damages under the Maryland False Claims Act. What does that mean? Either contractors get hit with penalties because the standards can't be met, or there is compliance and Maryland programs cease to be funded. The current system works and is training thousands of Marylanders. Nothing in the system is broken, and is what ABC is fighting to protect. Thank you.
Riveting, gentlemen, riveting. Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. I do believe that concludes this hearing. Next, we have Delegate Hornberger. Is he around? There he is. Thank you guys very much. Delegate Hornberger on House Bill 1002.
Okay, afternoon, Chair Wilson and Vice Chair Crosby. For the record, Delegate Hornberger here with HB 1002, Consumer and Display Fireworks Regulation and Tax. This bill would legalize brick and mortar fireworks sales, similar to what we have in our neighboring states. I've included a heat map in the attachments of your packet. It shows you that we are completely surrounded by fireworks dispensaries, and we're losing tax dollars to those. This bill includes safeguards such as minimum distance from structures, exemptions where they cannot be used, and prescribes a cut of the taxes go towards funding for fire and EMS. Just to put that in numeric terms, we're talking about a 16% sales tax, which puts us on parity with neighboring jurisdictions. Our state loses a substantial amount of economic activity to neighboring states. Just in the sales tax alone that was just described, we'd be looking at an excess of $5 million in 2027. And in case you haven't heard, we do have a deficit. Neighboring states have legalized these already. Our consumers are going and buying them. In some cases, a baseball's throw away from my jurisdiction. The reason I came up with this bill is actually I have a constituent-owned company in Cecil County that produces these fireworks, manufactures them, and then is forced to sell them in neighboring jurisdictions. In this year's bill, because you may remember it from last year, we got some feedback, and we actually included an opt-out provision for counties that don't want fireworks sales, so that's new versus last year. And we also included an amendment that was requested by the equestrian community, which is similar to language used in neighboring states. Yeah, in other words, they don't want the fireworks being lit by the horse. It disturbs horses. So we've listened to the feedback. We're here to make the state some money. And the last thing that I would add is we have engaged the fire marshal's office, and their feedback to us has been, if you bring this sale inside the state, that it's easier for them to manage, inspect, and regulate these sales and products than it is if they're out of state. So with that, we ask for a favorable report. Love to take questions.
Seeing none, great job.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next bill we have is Delegate Orman. If you have a panel, please bring them up.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Dear Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. This is my first time before you all, so thank you guys for hosting me and for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 1476, which strengthens workplace integrity and fair business practices by closing a loophole that allows bad actors to use immigration status as a tool of intimidation against workers who report labor violations. Maryland has a long upheld principle that businesses should play by the rules and that honest employers should not be undercut by those who skirt the law. Last year, this bill took an important step by passing HB 136, which prohibited employers' retaliation against workers who report violations of wage, safety, tax, and labor laws. However, discussions with worker advocates revealed a gap. The law does not explicitly prevent employers from using immigration status as a means of coercion. This bill ensures that law-abiding businesses are protected from unfair competition by bad actors who manipulate workers into silence. It reinforces personal responsibility by ensuring workers can report violations without fears, allowing the market to function fairly and transparently. Accountability matters. HB 1476 empowers the Commissioner of Labor and Industry to investigate violations with a measured, business-friendly enforcement approach, starting with a mediation before imposing fines, which range from $1,000 from a first offense to $10,000 for repeat violations. Importantly, this bill does not interfere with federal immigration enforcement. It simply ensures that Maryland workplaces operate under the same fair rules for everyone, protecting law-abiding employers and workers alike. By passing HB 1476, we reinforce the rule of law, level the playing field for businesses, and protect the integrity of our economy. I respectfully request a favorable report with the proposed amendments. Thank you. And I'll pass it off to my panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Ama Frimpong, and I serve as the Legal Director at CASA. I am here to express CASA's strong support for this legislation, which aims to protect immigrant workers from adverse actions based on their immigration status and ensure that all workers, regardless of status, receive full legal protections. Last year, this committee took an important step in safeguarding workers by expanding retaliation protections to prevent employers from punishing employees who exercise their rights. This is now codified under Section 3105 of the Maryland Labor and Employment Act. However, in today's heightened political climate around immigration enforcement, immigrant workers face an increased risk of exploitation, which we at CASA are seeing already today. This legislation seeks to build on last year's foundation by adding immigration status disclosure as an explicitly protected category and ensuring that key labor laws are explicitly covered. This bill is about protecting workers, not burdening employers. Let's be clear. It does not interfere with employers' legal obligations to collect immigration-related information such as on I-9 forms, which is required, right? Additionally, any request for immigration-related information beyond what is necessary for employment should require a judicial warrant, consistent with existing data protection standards. CASA urges a favorable report, and thank you so much for your leadership in moving forward this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, Nick Katz? All right, well, it looks like you do have quite a few questions.
Yeah. Oh, my.
I'll say that, to my knowledge, you can always introduce yourself first.
I got nervous, but yes. Hi, I'm Teresa Warman, guys. Delegate Teresa Warman. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
We find out, yeah, there's. There are some real questions. All right, shocker. Delegate Pippy.
Thank you. So welcome to the committee
Thank
for
you.
the first time. That's why there's there's a lot of questions. But so let me ask something. Aren't employers explicitly prohibited from hiring somebody knowingly if they're here without documentation?
I think that we all know that in practice they do.
Okay. So the reason I bring that up is just, I feel like that kind of puts an employer in quite the bind, because even if it was for nefarious purposes, you know, they are, it's like a federal law. I mean, they're not allowed. Anyways, you know that, right?
I'll pass it on to my colleague if that's okay.
Sure. An employer, right, just because an employer makes the decision to employ someone who may not be lawfully authorized to work does not give them the permission to violate their rights, right? And so what we see a lot is that employers believe that, okay, because this person may not be lawfully authorized or may not have secure legal immigration status, that they can get away with violating their rights, and then further threaten them, right? That if you attempt to exercise your rights, we will call ICE on you. There needs to be a clear message that that is considered adverse action and that will not be tolerated.
Yeah, the only thing I would just say, and I mean, it's creative, but once an employer finds out, so let's say they didn't know, hypothetically, right? They didn't know, but then they found out later, which your bill implies, but they still have an ongoing obligation to then report that they've hired someone that's here. You know that, right? Otherwise, they would be breaking federal law, you know.
Absolutely, and the language of this bill makes clear that the, you know, it is not prohibiting employers from complying with the law, right? If an employer does, you know, who did not know, right, that they had employed someone who may not have been lawfully authorized to work, if they later find that out, right, of course, they are able to say, hey, you're not supposed to be working for me, I'm going to let you go. What this bill is meant to cover is situations specifically in which an employer is, you know, who knew all along, right, that, hey, this is who is working for me, but now they are actually looking for me to pay them a fair wage, or they're, you know, looking to exercise their rights, I am going to threaten to report them. And so the language of the bill is, you know, is explicitly meant to cover those situations where the reporting is being done to retaliate against a worker for seeking to exercise their rights.
Okay. Thank you for answering the questions. Thank you, for sure.
And I'm looking through the enforcement mechanism, and I guess what's interesting is, as the good delegate said from Frederick, the people that are hiring these individuals are violating federal law. So why are we working with them at all? It says the first thing we're gonna do is what was it? Mediation. But anybody who's been accused of doing this, they're already criminals. Am I wrong? I'm interested, like I said, I understand the point of the bill. I just don't understand why you'd be to negotiate with somebody who's basically acknowledging that they are violating federal law. Because then I worry that in doing that, you're kind of exacerbating the problem. Because while we have, whatever you feel about the immigration issue in this country, it's illegal to hire somebody who's not here legally. And by them threatening, that means they now know that they're here. So why would we mediate with these bad actors?
Thank you for that question. And I mean, I believe, Delegate, right, there's still some work being done to solidify some of the language of the bill, including enforcement mechanisms.
The enforcement mechanism is the part that we're still.
Well, I want you, we appreciate, because most people come in here, you know, while we go to judiciary and they want to make everything, they want to decriminalize everything, you know, in judiciary. When they come to ECM, they want everybody to get thrown in jail, every business owner to get locked up. So I appreciate the fact that you were going that route. I just, yeah, so keep it up for these other bills you might bring in. But on this one specifically, I just don't know how we can, in good faith or legally, negotiate with somebody that we know is violating a federal offense. And I don't know, I just want you to keep that in mind here on how we can possibly enforce this as far as, yeah, penalizing them, fining them, all of those things. But once we know that this individual is hiring somebody and violating federal law, now we have a weird duty. So I just want you to keep that in mind for the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's next? Oh, boy. Delegate Fisher?
That's not me.
Oh. Speechless. Delegate Adams.
So I'm only going to follow up Jesse's point. And I had to read with interest the Attorney General's letter. God bless him. So I've never seen this statement on a but I'm going to read it. So they give their opinion to support the bill. They're supporting your bill. But at the bottom of page 1, it says, this bill, I've never seen this, this bill letter is a statement of the Office of Attorney General's policy position on the reference pending legislation. For a legal or constitutional analysis of the bill, members like us of the House and the Senate should consult with the counsel to the General Assembly, Sandy Brantley, and they give her number and email address. Have you done that? Like, have you asked, that's like the, have you done that?
No, I have not. This is the first I'm hearing.
Would you mind if I do that?
You go right on ahead. I'd love to find out.
And I'll report to you as a sponsor what the answer is, but I got to imagine
please.
that yeah, all right, thank you. I'll
thank
do
you.
that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this is along the same lines. I was looking at the letter of opposition from Howard County, and they're probably almost as progressive as Montgomery County. And it may just be a language thing, but have you reached out, maybe more, but have you had a chance to reach out to them? And maybe it's just semantics to sort of kind of help tweak the language to where they can, you know, be in support, because I know you had a number of letters of support in the file, but Howard County pushed back, and that's very interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that they had pushback, but yeah, no, I'll definitely reach out to them and find out if there's any way that we can move forward with that in a manner that, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Well, I believe that concludes your testimony here, ma'am. Thank you very much for the welcome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Doug Waffle.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues of the Economic Matters Committee. For the record, Delegate Adrian Boafo here to present House Bill 1261. This bill is critical to protecting Maryland's longstanding commitment to fair and equal employment opportunities. For some background, in 1971, the Supreme Court ruled on Griggs v. Duke Power, a case that brought a case brought by African-American employees of the Duke Power Company. They challenged the company's tiered pay system, which required employees to pass an aptitude test to advance. The plaintiffs argued this requirement unfairly excluded African-American workers, violating Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The court ruled in their favor, finding that Duke's power testing requirement disproportionately prevented African-American employees from being hired and promoted. This case established disparate impact doctrine, which recognizes that neutral policies can still be discriminatory if they are disproportionately harmed or protected. Since then, courts across the country, including here in Maryland, have applied this principle when evaluating employment discrimination cases under Title VII. For over 50 years, Maryland courts have recognized disparate impact as a valid legal standard. However, the Trump administration has threatened to undermine these protections. The president's nominee at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, has begun rolling back key protections for Marylanders and folks across the country. It is not unrealistic to think that this longstanding legal precedent, like Griggs v. Duke Power, could be at risk. Just yesterday, the Department of Justice moved to dismiss or pause cases alleging that police and fire departments used written and physical tests that unfairly exclude Black and female applicants. This is just the start of a broader effort to roll back workplace protections for workers here in Maryland, and we have an opportunity to act now to preserve the right of workers in our state. HB 1261 ensures that Maryland continues to uphold fair employment practice as it has for decades. This legislation does not create a new legal standard. It simply codifies what Maryland courts have already recognized. I want to thank the Office of the Attorney General for their leadership here on this work, and with that, I urge a favorable report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jonathan Smith, I'm Chief of the Civil Rights Division of the Office of the Maryland Attorney General. As the delegate says, since the Supreme Court decided Griggs versus Duke Power in 1971, federal law has held that an employer can be held liable for discrimination under two circumstances. First, if the employer has a policy of differing treatment based on a protected category, often that's called intentional discrimination. Or second, if the employer has a policy of general applicability that is the effect of treating people in protected classes differently. This is often called disparate impact or disparate treatment. Disparate impact does not require intent. Disparate impact theory is under attack. Project 2025 calls for it to be eliminated. The acting chair of the EOC has criticized it, and there are cases in court challenging federal disparate impact regulations. The executive orders call it into question, and yesterday, as the delegate said, the Department of Justice dismissed or paused a whole group of cases. Maryland law tracks the federal law, and Maryland courts rely on the interpretation of federal law in interpreting Maryland law. SB 1261 will ensure that regardless of what happens at the federal level, disparate impact theory remains available under state law. I want to assure that this is a theory that is reasoned and balances the interests of both employers and of workers. The court has adopted a three-part test to consider disparate impact. First, is there a policy of general applicability that has a discriminatory effect on a protected class? If so, the court moves to the second step, is whether there's a legitimate business interest to be achieved by that policy. And finally, the burden shifts back to the question of whether the policy is the least restrictive mechanism to reasonably achieve that business objective. It is critical to note that SB 1261 creates no new liability. It reflects the existing law. The bill simply ensures that federal law will not change. If federal law changes, then Maryland law will not. We urge a favorable report.
Thank you. I guess I have a question because I'm trying to understand. In reading it, I'm sure you saw that. Are you trying to change the prima facie requirement?
No. No. Both the federal law and prior to 1991, the federal law and the state law were essentially the same. It says you cannot discriminate based upon race or other protected categories, and that's all that it said.
Right.
In Griggs versus Duke Power, the Supreme Court said, that doesn't require us to prove that there's intent. It just requires that you could, if you can prove intent, you can do that. That's a theory that is viable. You could prove it showing that there's a disparate effect on the categories. That theory is viable under Maryland law. The problem that we're worried about here is that Maryland courts have said, in interpreting our fair employment laws, we look to the analog federal law and how that's been interpreted by the courts. So right now, under Maryland's statutes, we could bring cases under disparate impact. Our statute doesn't mention intent, it doesn't change, this doesn't change anything. What we're concerned about is that if the courts, the federal courts, at the urging of the Trump administration, or we see a change in the federal law, that we'll then no longer be able to rely on federal jurisprudence for the interpretation of Maryland law. And so we just want to embed in Maryland law.
I guess that's why confusion is, because it's already embedded in Maryland law, because almost every federal decision is reflected in Maryland law through our own. And I, as an attorney, I don't have to look to federal law. I can look to how Maryland handled the cases in the 80s, in the 90s. And so regardless of what the feds do, it will be Maryland courts that decide. So, and I say that because even the judiciary is against this and believes that, you know, the worry is that we're going to switch it out from the prima facie case, where at least there has to be a burden of proof before you come in and then have to explain and defend yourself. So what I don't understand is, while we can talk about whatever the feds do, we have case law in Maryland. We have established case law in Maryland that doesn't go away just because we have a new president.
That is true, but it's not just a new president. There is a wholesale, across the board attack on.
And so is your worry that somehow our Maryland case law will get overturned?
So Maryland case law is essentially turned to look to the federal interpretation, to interpret Maryland statutes.
Correct.
So as the federal case law changes, we are concerned that the Maryland courts are going to turn to the.
So you understand where we're at here. We're in this little tailspin. So by your logic, let's change Maryland law. I would say we don't need to, but I think you might argue, well, if we don't change Maryland law, somebody's going to challenge Maryland law at the federal level, right? Because we already have prior cases, and I don't know why my mind is slipping right now. We already have stare decisis. We already have these cases established in Maryland. While they did look to federal law, right, we have created our own case law here in Maryland. So I don't understand why, regardless of what the feds do, unless you're saying that once the feds change their law, then our law will be challenged in the Supreme Court, right? If that's the worry, then us changing this doesn't make a difference, because then that will also be challenged at the federal Supreme Court level.
Okay. I don't think that there's risk that the court is going to find a constitutional basis to abolish disparate impact.
Correct.
I think there's very little risk of that. So I agree with you on that. So I don't think that if the state were to have a more protective standard than the federal government would have, that's subject to challenge. I think we're safe on that ground.
Yes.
So we agree about that. Where I think we don't necessarily agree is the certainty of which and the clarity of which the Supreme Court has spoken on this topic enough that we can be certain that with changing federal jurisprudence that we will not be having to deal with this issue on the local level. That all that this does, and I think that is to say put and codify and make it so that it's permanently in our code, is to say the existing standard, which is this burden shifting standard, is in Maryland statute.
Sure, but my worry is that if it won't survive now, it wouldn't survive then. More than just virtue signaling, I'm trying to find out what this actually does, because if for some reason the feds change their mind and they go a different direction, we still have established case law that we rely on, because that's controlling law. Maryland law is controlling law. So how do we get out of that, the multitude and thousands of decisions that have already explained what desperate impact and desperate treatment is, and the prima facie case that must be established, and the next step, once you've been accused and there's a prima facie state, then at that point the employer must explain a rationale for the actions they did that are legal. That's the current standard, by not just federal law, by state law. So I don't understand how that changes by what we do here today.
Yeah, I think that 2 points. One is, I don't think there's a state analog to Griggs Power that clearly articulates the standard.
You don't think there's any case law?
No, I didn't say there's no case law. I just don't think that you've got the unambiguous statement in the same way that you do in the cases that follow Griggs. The other point is that this doesn't actually change anything. That's the whole point, is it makes sure that we write in stone what the current standard is. And so to the extent to which...
Have you seen the judiciary, and do you have any response to the judiciary's concerns?
I have not seen the
It would be very important, especially being a member of the Attorney General's office, that you look at our judiciary, our Maryland judiciary, and their response. And while they are information, as we've learned here, information isn't always information, they're very concerned with this expansion requiring, and they feel, the employer to demonstrate that every decision is justified by a legitimate business necessity and that no other less discriminatory means of accomplishing that business necessity is available. It basically requires them to prove a negative. So that in itself, these are our justices here. So I would ask that before we make any more moves this way, we at least consult the people that create the law, the people that are going to continue to enforce Maryland case law, because they believe, I'm assuming, that what we have is good enough. Pippi, please.
No, you're asking good questions. So, Delegate Waffle, can you give us some examples? I mean, I hear everybody dancing around them, but give us some examples of a neutral, on its face business decision that results in disparate impact that you want to eradicate from Maryland.
Yeah, I'm going to yield to the expert here.
Well, he's definitely, if he's with the AG's office, I don't want to hear from him. You go ahead.
Well, he's definitely the Assistant Attorney General, so I'm going to yield to the Assistant Attorney General here.
Well, I got his testimony here already. I'd like to hear from
If you want to hear examples, you can hear from the Assistant Attorney General.
All right, well, witnesses want to answer questions, so there you go. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
There you go.
All right, I think that concludes this bill hearing. I see no witnesses, right? Nobody, so I think that concludes our day too. Perfect. And I thank you very much for a very short day.
Is this over, sir?
We're fine, just do it later.
Okay. Okay.
It's like mid-April. Mid-April? So we're gonna start this whole time until we get ready to vote, okay?